Hi, my name is Rachel Connors. I'm 34 years old, and I own a small but successful auto repair garage in Asheville, North Carolina. I build transmissions for a living. I fix broken machines. I make things run again. Funny how I could do all that for metal and wires, but I had no idea my own marriage was rusting from the inside, eaten away by betrayal. What would you do if the person you loved most in the world betrayed you? Not just with anyone, but with the one person you trusted second most. My husband and my best friend. Two people who had been part of every major memory in my adult life who decided, for whatever twisted reason, that I was disposable, replaceable, someone to lie to, use, and discard. But this isn't a sob story. This is how I tore down their fake little world piece by piece, and how I walked away, stronger, smarter, and absolutely unstoppable. Before I get into the details, because trust me, they're insane, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you love real, raw stories about betrayal, revenge, and personal power. And don't forget to comment below where you're watching from. I love seeing how far stories like mine can travel. All right, let's start from the beginning. I wasn't always tough. In fact, growing up, I was the quiet kid who liked to sketch in grease-stained notebooks in my dad's auto shop. My mom passed away when I was 16. Cancer. She was the kindest person I've ever known. After that, it was just me, my dad, and my little sister Claire. Dad taught me how to rebuild engines because he couldn't afford to hire help, and I was too stubborn to let him drown in debt. By the time I graduated high school, I could strip down a diesel truck blindfolded. I never went to college, couldn't afford it, but I got certified as an ASE master mechanic by 21 and started my own business in a crumbling lot downtown. It was a fight every single day, but eventually the garage grew. Clients came back. Word spread. I hired 2 employees, bought a house, and then I met Logan. Logan Wells, charming, articulate, former software engineer who worked remote, claimed he was tired of Silicon Valley culture. His car broke down outside my garage, and I fixed it for free because he made me laugh. That smile, God. He had a smile like something from a toothpaste commercial. Polished, effortless, dangerous. If I'd had any sense at the time. We fell in love quickly. He brought me coffee every morning, made pancakes on Sundays, told me I was intimidating in the best way. I had never felt more seen. Logan made me feel like I didn't need to downplay my ambition or soften my voice. We got married 2 years later in a small ceremony. No big speeches, just a quiet vow to never lie, never betray, and never give up on each other. That was his idea. And then, there was Ivy. Ivy Palmer had been my best friend since college, my roommate, my bridesmaid, my emergency contact. We'd been through everything together: breakups, job loss, a fire in our first apartment, the flu pandemic. She was fiercely loyal, or so I thought. She made everyone laugh at parties, always had a bottle of wine ready when I needed to vent, and even helped me repaint the garage when I couldn't afford contractors. Ivy was like family, closer than my own blood. Sometimes. Looking back, the signs were there. Logan started mentioning Ivy more and more. "She's been so down lately," he'd say. "You should invite her over." And when Ivy was around, she'd make these little comments, jokes. Maybe, but barbed ones. "You're lucky. Logan, Rachel's tough but hot, total unicorn." Or, "If I ever find someone like you, I swear I'll lock him in the basement." I laughed them off. Who wouldn't? These were my people, my husband, my best friend. Until the night I found the ultrasound. Logan had asked me to help clean up his laptop because it was running slow. He'd downloaded a bunch of tax documents and needed help sorting through them. I opened a folder labeled 2023 Medical and saw a file, Clinic Visit March. I thought it was his annual physical, or maybe something he forgot to tell me. What I saw instead were 5 high-res ultrasound images, 7 weeks, estimated due date, and in the corner, patient Ivy Palmer. It felt like someone kicked me in the chest. My lungs forgot how to work. My ears started ringing. I stared at the screen. Not understanding at first, I blinked, read it again, and then I realized I wasn't pregnant. I had never been pregnant. But someone was, and Logan had saved the scans on his personal laptop. I took the computer, walked into the kitchen, and placed it silently in front of him. He was making tea. When he saw the screen, he froze. "What's this?" I asked, my voice low, controlled. He didn't lie. He didn't even pretend to be confused. He just said, "You weren't supposed to see that. You weren't supposed to see that." Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "Let me explain." Not even guilt. Just an inconvenience. I asked one question, "Is it yours?" He nodded. That was it. That was the moment my marriage ended, not with screaming or tears, but with a slow, hollow collapse from the inside out. Logan tried to talk, tried to say it just happened, that Ivy had been going through a rough time, and they didn't mean to hurt me, but I wasn't even listening. My mind was somewhere else, replaying 100 tiny moments, a shared look between them at my birthday party. That time Ivy stayed late at our house while I was at the night shift. Logan telling me not to be so jealous when I asked about texts I wasn't supposed to see. It wasn't just betrayal, it was a conspiracy. I told him to get out. And here's where it gets worse. Because Logan refused. He said we were both responsible for the state of the marriage, that we had grown apart, that maybe this baby was a wake-up call for all of us. I laughed. Actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so absurd I couldn't cry. That night, I didn't sleep. I called Matthew, a longtime friend who now worked as a family law attorney. By morning, he had drawn up paperwork. I had legal grounds for a fault-based divorce under North Carolina law, adultery, and because Logan had violated our prenuptial agreement, which included a fidelity clause, I could freeze access to shared assets within 48 hours. And I did. But even as the legal wheels started turning, my heart hadn't caught up. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was hollow, grieving, not just for the loss of my marriage, but for the version of me that believed it had been real. I stayed home from the garage for 3 days. Claire, my sister, showed up with coffee and a crowbar, not because she was going to hit anyone, but because symbolism matters. She told me, "You fix cars for a living. Time to fix your life." And that's when I decided I wasn't going to fall apart. I wasn't going to drink wine and cry on the kitchen floor like some soap opera extra. No, I was going to burn this lie to the ground, bolt by bolt. I went back to work on the 4th day. It wasn't because I was okay. I wasn't. But grief is quieter in motion. So I threw myself into engines and torque wrenches and oil-stained gloves, letting the noise drown out everything else. Clients came and went, asking polite questions about Logan's absence. I smiled and said he was taking some time. What I didn't say was that he'd taken everything he could, and I was in the process of taking it all back. By the end of the week, Logan had officially moved out, not without a fight. Of course, he tried bargaining first, promised to end things with Ivy, claimed it was a mistake. When that didn't work, he pivoted to guilt, told me I was shutting him out, and that maybe we could co-parent the baby as a modern family. I nearly laughed again. Co-parent a child born from betrayal. Not in this lifetime. Not in any lifetime. He finally left after I changed the locks and had Matthew deliver a cease and desist for trespassing. But Logan wasn't my biggest problem anymore. That honor belonged to Ivy. She showed up 2 weeks later. I was under the hood of a '98 Ford Ranger when I heard her voice behind me, tentative, familiar, and completely unwelcome. "Hey, can we talk?" I ducked out from under the hood, grease on my face, sweat on my collarbone. She looked like hell-sunken cheeks, dark circles, but still dressed in a cardigan that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her belly had started to show. The bump under her gray knit was subtle but undeniable. That child, his child, was real. Breathing, growing. "What the hell are you doing here?" I asked, wiping my hands on a rag that suddenly felt too clean. "I know you hate me, and you have every right to, but I need help." "Help? From me? You didn't need help when you were sleeping with my husband," I said flatly. Ivy didn't argue. She just stood there, eyes glossy, hands folded over her stomach like some kind of tragic saint. "He's gone. Rachel. Logan left. He hasn't answered my calls in a week. He moved into some loft downtown with, I think her name's Brooklyn." The name hit me like a slap. Brooklyn was another so-called friend from our college circle. She used to flirt with Logan at game nights, but I always thought it was harmless. Apparently, Ivy hadn't been the only one with a secret. "I don't have money. My parents cut me off. I can't even afford the prenatal vitamins my doctor prescribed," she whispered, tears spilling over. "I'm alone." Part of me wanted to scream, not because she was crying, but because she had the nerve to come to me, the woman she helped betray, as if I owed her some kind of redemption arc. "Ivy," I said, voice steady but sharp, "you are not a victim. You made choices, calculated ones. So don't come here expecting sympathy just because they didn't pay off." She swallowed hard, but she didn't leave. "You don't understand," she said quietly. "It wasn't just an affair. Logan told me you didn't love him anymore, that you were cold, controlling, that he was just a burden to your ambition. And I believed him." I felt something twist in my stomach, not pain, not empathy, rage. "That's how he got you?" I asked. "He sold you a sob story, and you bought it with your dignity." Ivy didn't respond. She just nodded, cheeks flushed with shame or exhaustion or both. She turned to go, then paused. "For what it's worth, I never meant to hurt you." I said nothing, because any words I had left weren't meant for her ears. But what she said next stopped me cold. "Also, there's something else. Something I think you should know." And with that, she pulled out her phone and showed me a series of texts. From Logan, to Ivy, and another woman, Brooklyn, and someone named Danielle. They weren't just cheating, they were competing. Logan had been playing all of us, me, Ivy, Brooklyn, even some woman none of us knew. He had a rotation. "I thought I was the one," Ivy said quietly, "but I was just a placeholder until something shinier came along." I looked at her face, crumpled and wet with tears, and for the first time, I saw her not as a villain, but as another casualty of Logan's ego. But I wasn't going to let my empathy rewrite history. So I said, "Thanks for the info, now go." That night, I sat in my garage office with Matthew, sorting through legal strategy. Turns out, Ivy had tried to submit a coerced emotional distress claim in case Logan refused to support the baby. Her angle, that I created a hostile environment by kicking her out of my life. "She was trying to paint you as the abuser," Matthew said, pointing to her draft complaint. "Claimed you were manipulative, that you sabotaged her self-esteem." "So, she wasn't just sorry," I muttered. "She was desperate." Matthew sighed. She was calculating, until her leverage walked out. We revised our case. I added documentation camera footage from the garage. Texts Logan had sent me during the affair that showed his gaslighting. Even a voicemail Ivy accidentally left while mocking my voice. Every receipt was time-stamped, every interaction documented. But emotionally, I still wasn't free, because betrayal doesn't just end when the door closes. It festers. It echoes. Claire found me pacing the garage at midnight one night, unable to sleep, engine grease still on my forearms. She grabbed my wrist and said, "You're not just mad at them. You're mad at yourself." She was right. I hated myself for not seeing it sooner, for doubting my instincts, for trusting people who'd proven unworthy. And that's when the anger settled into resolve. I wasn't just going to survive this. I was going to turn the wreckage into something sharper, more dangerous, something no one would see coming. Because I wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. The next morning, I walked into the garage with a calm I hadn't felt in weeks. It wasn't peace, it was focus. Pure, calculated focus. I'd spent the entire night drawing up a plan, not just to protect myself legally, but to dismantle every false narrative Logan had wrapped himself in. This wasn't about rage anymore. This was about correction, realignment, justice. I started by calling Tori Lou. Tori wasn't exactly my friend. She was more of an acquaintance, someone I'd seen at Ivy's dinner parties and social mixers, the kind of woman who never looked entirely comfortable in heels. Always seemed to notice too much and say too little. She worked with Ivy at the same PR firm and had always struck me as sharp, maybe even underutilized.
When I called, I didn't sugarcoat it. I need to know if you've seen anything between Ivy and Logan. Anything strange.
Tori went silent for a few seconds. Then she asked, "You want the truth, or the version Ivy tells herself to sleep at night?" "I want the truth." She let out a quiet breath. "Then, let's meet, somewhere private." We met at a cafe 20 minutes from town. She walked in wearing oversized sunglasses and a hoodie like she was meeting a source for a whistleblower interview. But once she sat down, her demeanor changed. "Ivy's not who you think she is," she started. "She's charming. Sure, but when she wants something, she plays dirty." She'd been flirting with Logan for months openly. In front of coworkers, she bragged that she could take him back anytime she wanted. She used to call you garage girl when you weren't around. Said Logan deserved someone more refined. I clenched my jaw. And Logan, equally bad. He leaned into it, let her flirt, then acted like the victim when things got messy. Said he was trapped in a marriage where he wasn't admired. Played the poor, emasculated husband card. Half the office thought he was emotionally abused because that's what Ivy told them. That stopped me cold. I felt the blood drain from my face. Not because it was new information, but because it confirmed what I already suspected. This wasn't just a betrayal of love. It was an assassination of my character.
Tori reached into her bag and handed me a thumb drive. There's more. Voice memos Ivy recorded at work. She bragged about getting Logan to forget the woman with grease under her nails. She was playing a long game. Rachel. I didn't say thank you. I couldn't. My throat felt like sandpaper. When I got home, I plugged the drive into my laptop. There they were, 3 separate audio files. Ivy's voice, unmistakable, laughing over wine and takeout with Brooklyn. Rachel, she'll forgive him. She always does. She's too proud to look weak. And then Logan's voice, softer. Seductive, I told you. I can't leave just yet. We need to time this right. I sat back, stunned. They'd planned this. Not just the affair, but the reveal. The timing. The manipulation. They thought I'd fall apart quietly. They really didn't know me at all. That night, I drafted what I called the blueprint. It wasn't a revenge plot in the movie sense. There were no car chases or explosions. It was cleaner, smarter, and far more permanent. Step 1. Expose the narrative. I scheduled a community fundraiser at the garage, something we did annually for local high school trade students. I called in every favor, invited every mutual friend who'd seen me and Logan as that perfect couple. Ivy was on the guest list too. So was Brooklyn. Even Logan got an invite. Sent via Tori's email under the guise of networking opportunity. Step 2. Control the story. The night of the fundraiser, the garage was spotless. Polished floors, new signage,
tables set up with sponsorship brochures, cupcakes from a local bakery, and business cards with my new branding, Rachel Connors Auto and Performance, built by grit, run by guts. Around 8 p.m., I took the mic. Before we thank our donors tonight, I said, I want to share a little story about trust, about who we choose to let under our hoods. The crowd chuckled politely, not yet realizing what was coming. Sometimes, the people you trust most, your spouse, your best friend, are the ones sabotaging your engine from the inside. Silence. You see, while I was busy rebuilding this garage, someone I loved was busy tearing down everything we built together. And while I was planning our future, they were recording voice memos to laugh at my grease-stained hands. I pressed a button on the small speaker beside me. Ivy's voice crackled to life. She'll forgive him. She always does. She's too proud to look weak. Murmurs. Gasps. Then Logan's voice, I can't leave just yet. We need to time this right. The crowd turned. Eyes scanned for the source. Ivy was already shrinking into the wall. Logan stood stiff near the back, face drained of color. I smiled calmly. Turns out, grease washes off, but some stains, some betrayals, leave scars that make you smarter. Step 3, erase their leverage. Matthew had filed official court documentation that week, submitting the audio files and emails as evidence of emotional manipulation and defamation. Ivy's attempt to claim emotional distress was dismissed within 48 hours. Logan's financial assets, shared investments, pension contributions were frozen, pending the divorce outcome. And Brooklyn. She was served with a cease and desist after posting slander about me online, complete with screenshots Tori had retrieved showing Brooklyn conspiring with Ivy to take over Rachel's network. But there was one last piece. The car? Logan's prized 1971 Chevy Chevelle, cherry red, fully restored, the one I had spent months rebuilding for our anniversary. He left it at the garage when he moved out. So, on the night of the fundraiser, I raffled it off. $100 per ticket. All proceeds went to the trade school scholarship fund. When Logan realized what was happening, he lunged for the clipboard. You can't do this. That's mine. No, I said, calmly, handing him the signed title. It was mine. I built it. And now, it's theirs. A teenage girl from the local vocational high school won it. I handed her the keys with a grin. She's fast, but she's loyal. Treat her better than he did. The crowd erupted. Logan stormed out. Ivy vanished. And for the first time in months, I felt something settle deep inside me. Not revenge, not satisfaction, just alignment. I had made things right, not through cruelty, but by being deliberate, strategic, just like they'd tried to be with me. But my moves were smarter. And they were far from over. In the days following the fundraiser, everything changed, but not in the dramatic, fireworks exploding kind of way. No. It was quieter than that, more satisfying, like finally exhaling after holding your breath underwater for far too long. The story spread quickly, and I didn't have to do much. A few guests posted clips from the event, just enough to get traction, just enough to let the whispers grow teeth. Ivy tried to claim the audio was out of context, but nobody was buying it, not after years of seeing her on my arm at every gathering, every milestone, pretending to be the loyal friend. People weren't just surprised, they were disgusted. Brooklyn deleted her social media within 24 hours. Then she sent me a long email titled Apology and Reflection, where she somehow blamed toxic loyalty culture for making her think she had to choose Logan over integrity. I didn't respond. I forwarded it to Matthew for documentation, then archived it, because her regret meant nothing to me. Regret is easy. Remorse, that's earned. Ivy, on the other hand, wasn't done trying. She texted me a week later. You've made your point, but don't take it out on the baby. The baby,
It was the first time she'd used the word like it was something sacred, as if invoking motherhood would cleanse everything she'd done, as if she could leverage the life growing inside her to bypass consequences. That message stayed unread. But what she did next? She showed up again. This time, not at the garage, but at my house. I was outside watering my garden when I saw her gray SUV pull up. She got out slowly, belly now undeniable, face drawn tight with tension. I should have gone inside. I should have called security. But I stood still, arms crossed, hose dripping onto the driveway. "Rachel," she said softly, "please, I'm not asking you to forgive me. I know that's not on the table, but I need help. I can't do this alone." My silence must have felt like a wall because she rushed forward, her voice picking up speed. "I lost my job. Brooklyn cut me off. My parents won't take me in because they're humiliated. I'm barely affording groceries. I have doctor's appointments and no insurance. I don't even know where I'm going to live next month." I let the silence stretch between us until it got uncomfortable. Then I said, "And you think the woman you humiliated, lied to, betrayed is your lifeline now?" Her eyes welled up. "I made a mistake." "You made 100 mistakes. Systematically, repeatedly. You just didn't expect to pay the full price." She didn't argue. She just nodded, breathing hard. "I'm not asking for your couch or your money," she said, "but if there's any way, you could help me find something stable, even a referral, something." That moment was a test, not of kindness, but of clarity. Could I be decent without being a doormat? Could I acknowledge her humanity without inviting her back into mine? I gave her the number of a women's shelter I donated to every year. I told her they offered job placement, housing assistance, even prenatal care. I didn't hug her. I didn't ask her to keep me updated. I gave her one chance out of respect for the unborn child, not for her. She looked at the card like it was an eviction notice, but then she nodded and got back in her car. That was the last time I saw Ivy Palmer in person. Logan, though he still had a few moves left. He tried to file a motion to access funds from our joint investment account, claiming financial duress. He had spent nearly half his savings shuffling from Airbnb to Airbnb, trying to keep up the image of success. Apparently, Brooklyn kicked him out 2 weeks after the fundraiser, found texts on his phone, same tricks, different woman. He also lost his position with the remote software firm after they received an anonymous tip about unprofessional conduct with a client. That tip, I didn't send it. Tori did. She'd had enough of the toxic, whisper-filled environment Ivy had created. Once Ivy was out of the way, Tori filed a formal HR complaint, and everything Logan had been hiding behind slick charm began to crumble. In court, Logan looked like a ghost, pale, unshaven, collar wrinkled. He spoke softly, trying to win the judge's favor. But I had receipts, and Matthew had structured the case beautifully. We got everything: full ownership of all shared property, retention of my business, a percentage of Logan's future earnings once he reestablished work, to recover unpaid spousal damages, and perhaps most importantly, a public record of emotional manipulation and dishonesty. The judgment was clear. I had not just survived, I had won. But let me tell you something they don't include in the legal paperwork: winning doesn't always feel like victory. Sometimes it's just silence, absence, a breath where pain used to live. In the weeks that followed, I found a rhythm again. The garage boomed calls, clients, interviews. Some media outlet caught wind of the garage fundraiser gone viral, and suddenly, I was being asked to speak at vocational schools. Me, the woman they once mocked for having grease under her nails, was now being praised for resilience, strategy, and strength. I hired 2 new apprentices. One of them was that same teenage girl who won Logan's Chevelle. She'd decided to pursue a career in auto tech. She told me I made her feel like it was possible to be smart, skilled, and unapologetically herself. I didn't cry, but I wanted to.
As for Matthew, he'd been around through the entire storm. Late-night calls, last-minute filings, emotional support I didn't even know I needed. One evening, after we'd finished drafting my estate plan because, I wasn't leaving anything to chance anymore, he looked at me across the table and said, "You know, most people either fall apart or harden after what you've been through. But you recalibrated." And I think that's the most accurate word anyone's ever used to describe me. I didn't seek revenge to ruin their lives. I sought clarity to reclaim mine. And in doing so, I uncovered something far more powerful than vengeance control. Over my narrative, over my peace, over the way my story ends. But there's one last chapter I haven't told yet. And it starts with a letter. One that arrived 6 months after the fundraiser. Handwritten, no return address. Inside, a single sentence. "You were right about everything. I'm sorry." It wasn't signed, but I knew the handwriting. And it left me with a choice, one I wasn't sure I was ready to make. The letter sat untouched on my kitchen table for nearly 2 weeks. I didn't want to open it again. I didn't want to reread those 7 words and feel anything, because I knew who wrote it. And even though it was unsigned, even though it came in a plain envelope with no scent, no flourish, just stark ink on cream paper, I recognized the shape of those letters like I recognized the memory of a scar. It was Logan's handwriting, careful, precise, a man who always calculated his words, even when he was tearing something apart.
"You were right about everything. I'm sorry."
No excuses, no begging, just an admission. But strangely, it didn't land like a bomb or catharsis. It landed like dust, quiet, harmless, something I'd already swept away. I didn't respond, because there was nothing left to say. Whatever Logan had hoped that letter would do, make me reach out, question my convictions, reopen some forgotten door, it didn't work. He was a chapter long since closed, and some pages aren't meant to be revisited, not even out of pity. Instead, I focused on what mattered: the life I'd rebuilt, the rhythm I'd found, mornings that started with black coffee and an engine check, evenings spent under the soft hum of overhead lights in the garage, helping the apprentices refine their work. My team was stronger now: 2 women, 1 veteran, and a 19-year-old kid who called me Boss Lady Rach like it was a badge of honor. We had more business than we could handle. And for the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. But healing, real healing, doesn't arrive all at once. It seeps in slowly. I still had moments where I'd wake up disoriented, heart pounding, as if my mind was bracing for another betrayal. I'd catch myself expecting the next lie, the next crack in the wall. Trauma rewires you like that. It sharpens your instincts, but also makes you jumpy, even in safe spaces. That's when I started journaling. Nothing fancy, just a leather notebook and a blue pen. I wrote about every feeling I couldn't explain, every moment of grief that arrived late, like a forgotten RSVP. I wrote about the guilt of not helping Ivy more, about the strange emptiness of winning a war you never wanted to fight. And in one entry, I wrote something that changed everything. It wasn't just that they betrayed me, it's that I let their actions define how I saw myself. And I'm done with that. Because here's the truth, no one likes to say out loud, revenge might feel satisfying in the moment, but it's not the real prize. The real prize is freedom. Mental freedom, emotional clarity, the ability to look at the wreckage, acknowledge the pain, and still choose joy. And believe it or not, joy started showing up in strange, unexpected ways. One day, the girl who won Logan's Chevelle came back to the garage. She'd been in a small fender bender, not her fault, and came in almost in tears, thinking she'd ruined it. But when I opened the hood, everything inside was intact. That engine's tougher than it looks. I told her, kind of like you. Her smile could have powered a city block. Another time, I ran into Tori at a local event. She had left the PR firm and started her own media consulting business, small, scrappy, but authentic. "You inspired me," she said. "You made me realize I didn't have to stay in rooms that made me smaller." We've since partnered on several community campaigns for vocational education. Even Matthew Steady, reliable Matthew, became something more. What started as gratitude became friendship. And what grew from that? Well, it was slow, gentle, no grand gestures, just two people showing up consistently for each other. The kind of love that doesn't knock you off your feet, but gives you ground to stand on. And yet the past never truly disappears. It just changes shape. 6 months after the fundraiser, I got word that Ivy had moved states. She'd taken the shelter referral, got placed in a women's support program, and given birth to a healthy baby girl. I didn't reach out, but I kept tabs through a mutual contact. Ivy was working at a diner, taking night classes, quiet, trying, maybe. Finally, facing herself without hiding behind borrowed men or borrowed confidence. Brooklyn vanished off the radar. No social presence, no whispers, just gone. Logan. Last I heard, he was freelancing tech support gigs under a fake LLC name, trying to rebuild his credibility. I wasn't angry about it, if anything. I hoped he learned something, because when a person burns enough bridges, eventually they run out of places to stand. As for me, I'm still here, still in Asheville, still in my boots and oil-stained jeans. But I'm not the same woman who once believed loyalty would protect her from betrayal. I'm sharper now, but not colder, more discerning, but not harder. And if someone were to ask me what I learned from all this, what I'd say to another woman standing in the wreckage of a broken marriage, I'd tell her this: you don't need revenge to prove your worth. You don't need to win every argument or unmask every lie. You just need to choose yourself, every day, loudly, unapologetically, because the real victory isn't making them sorry, it's making yourself whole.
In the end, betrayal didn't break me. It built me, not into someone bitter, but someone better.
So if you're watching this, and you've been betrayed, lied to, underestimated, just know you are not the damage they left. You are the structure you rebuild. And me, I'm living proof that sometimes, when your world falls apart, it's just making space for something stronger. Thanks for sticking with me through this story. If you've ever gone through something similar, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. Let's make this a space for truth, growth, and yes, just a little bit of well-deserved justice. And hey, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs a reminder that comeback stories are always possible, especially the ones where the hero has grease on her hands and fire in her chest.
I'll see you in the next story.
Until then, stand tall, love louder, and never, ever let anyone write your ending for you. Story 2. My name is Olivia Monroe. I'm 30 years old, and I was born in a laboratory. I don't mean that figuratively or as some kind of angsty metaphor. I was literally conceived in a fertility clinic through pre-implantation genetic diagnosis to be a perfect HLA match for my older sister, Maddie, a savior sibling, as the polite term goes. But there was nothing polite about the way I was raised. To the outside world, the Monroe family of Seattle, Washington, looked like a miracle in motion. My parents, Karen, a trauma therapist, and Richard, a biomedical engineer, were beloved in their suburban community. Maddie, their firstborn, was a bright artistic child diagnosed at age 4 with severe aplastic anemia. When her condition worsened and no donor match could be found, the Monroes made what the media once called a brave and innovative choice. They made me. I don't remember my birth, obviously, but I've seen the photos. Maddie in a hospital bed, smiling weakly. My mother holding me like I was an IV bag with a heartbeat. Reporters outside the children's hospital. Genetics saves a life. The headlines read, "No one asked what it cost me." The first time I donated bone marrow, I was 14 months old. I learned to walk in a hospital hallway with an IV trailing behind me. By age 5, I had undergone 4 procedures and countless blood draws. Maddie was always fragile, always sick, and I was always there. A walking pharmacy, a body that bled conveniently. At age 7, I asked Mom if I could skip a scheduled donation because I had the flu. She didn't look up from her notes. "Olivia, you're the reason Maddie's alive. Don't be selfish." That was the day I stopped asking questions. As I grew up, my room looked less like a child's sanctuary and more like a recovery ward. Medical binders lined my shelves. My arms were decorated with scar tissue before I ever wore a training bra. I wasn't encouraged to join soccer. Too risky. Couldn't go to sleepovers. What if Maddie needed platelets? But the worst wasn't the procedures. It was the knowledge that I was never allowed to say no. No one taught me consent. Only sacrifice. Maddie, 3 years older and endlessly adored, never thanked me. I was her backup system. As she once said during a fight in middle school, "You were made to save me, so shut up and do your job." She didn't say it with malice, just indifference. That was how love worked in our house. I remember when my mother once told a neighbor, "Olivia is strong, Maddie is delicate. They balance each other." Like we were designed to complete a yin-yang of suffering and need. I was the resilient one, the unbreakable, the body that gave. And then there was the moment that cracked my world in half. I was 10. I had been having terrible dreams, surgical lights, masks, the taste of metal in my mouth. At breakfast one morning, I overheard my parents arguing in hushed tones in the kitchen. "We can't keep pushing her like this," Dad said. "She's exhausted. She was created for this." Mom replied coldly, "Don't get sentimental. We have no other match. Maddie will die if we stop." Dad didn't argue again. I went to school that day, but I couldn't think straight. I started drawing on the margins of my notebook, scribbling spirals over and over until the paper ripped. That night, I stared at the ceiling and realized I was not their daughter. I was a treatment plan with a heartbeat. I stopped crying after that. Instead, I learned to play my role silently, efficiently. My voice was my greatest liability. I watched other kids run and laugh and scream about how unfair life was when they didn't get dessert. I stayed quiet. I read medical textbooks instead of fairy tales. I memorized blood types, compatibility tables, and the names of medications I couldn't pronounce. Still, I was never enough. Maddie's condition deteriorated in high school. At age 13, I was approached about another donation this time. Partial liver tissue, a major surgery, permanent risks. I told them I was scared, that I wanted to wait. My mother stared at me like I had stabbed someone. "You don't get to be scared. Olivia, she's dying. Do you want that on your conscience?" And then, for the first time, I said something I didn't know I was capable of. "What about your conscience?" She slapped me, just once, quick, cold. That night, I curled up in my closet and cried silently into the stuffed elephant a nurse had once given me. It smelled like iodine and comfort. I wanted to run, to vanish, but where would I go? Who would believe me? That's when Isabel entered my story. My mom's estranged sister, Isabel, was a nurse practitioner who lived in Colorado. She had kept her distance from our family for years, but after a conference trip to Seattle, she made an effort to reconnect. I was 15, and she took me to lunch at a quiet vegan cafe. She looked at my pale face, my bandaged arms, and asked gently, "Olivia, do you want this life?" I didn't answer. I just started shaking. She reported my case to the hospital's child advocacy team. Nothing happened. My parents were respected, wealthy, persuasive. The hospital quietly blacklisted her from internal referrals. But Isabel didn't stop. She reached out to CPS. She gathered statements from former nurses, including Lena, the only adult in my life who had ever looked at me with anything resembling kindness. Lena described in detail how I was brought into surgeries while sobbing, how no one explained anything to me, how I was treated like a living medical instrument. It took 3 more months and another near-fatal procedure before CPS acted. The day they showed up at our house, I was sitting in bed recovering from another marrow extraction. Maddie was in her room, pale and fading, and my mother was on the phone with a transplant coordinator. When the social worker asked me if I felt safe, I said one word: no. What followed was a storm. My parents denied everything, accused Isabel of poisoning me against them. Maddie called me a traitor. But the truth had already pierced the surface. I was removed from their custody that week. I went to live with Isabel. I was 16, and for the first time in my life, I had a door that locked from the inside. But I also had something else. A terrifying, powerful seed of clarity that would one day bloom into something darker, stronger. Not forgiveness, vengeance. And that seed would soon find the perfect soil in tragedy, guilt, and a final request that would change everything. Freedom didn't feel like sunlight or laughter. Not at first. It felt like silence. The kind of silence that presses against your skull like altitude sickness. The kind that exposes how hollow you've become. Living with Aunt Isabel was safe, but it wasn't simple. I was 17, legally emancipated from my parents, enrolled in a new high school in Colorado, and expected to function like a normal teenager. I couldn't. My body had learned to respond only to crisis. If no one was bleeding, if no one needed saving, I didn't know what to do with myself. I'd sit in my room, staring at the locked door, expecting someone to burst in and demand blood. Isabel was patient. She never pushed. She gave me structure. Yes, therapy appointments, school, dinner at the same time every night. But she also gave me something I had never experienced: unconditional presence. Some nights I'd cry and throw things. Some mornings I wouldn't speak. She stayed. I learned how to eat food because I was hungry, not because someone needed my platelets. I learned that silence in a room wasn't always dangerous, that pain didn't have to be constant to feel real. But guilt is a vine. It curls into your bones and whispers lies in your own voice. She died because you walked away. You betrayed the only people who ever needed you. I knew Maddie was getting worse. I saw it in the hospital reports that still found their way to me. I overheard Isabel talking to Lena late at night. The doctors had tried everything. But Maddie's body was failing again. And this time, she wasn't responding to treatment. I didn't reach out. I didn't call. I couldn't. Then the letter came. It was handwritten on ivory stationery. The envelope smelled faintly of lavender. The handwriting was unmistakable Maddie's, flowy and dramatic. I almost didn't open it. My fingers trembled as I broke the seal. "Liv," it began, "I know I was horrible to you. I won't insult your intelligence by pretending I didn't know. I did. I just didn't care. I was always dying, and you were always living in that shadow. I hated you for being strong. But the truth is, I was terrified of losing you. You were the only part of me that was ever pure." There were 6 pages. Maddie poured out her version of our life, how she felt trapped too, how our parents made her feel like porcelain while I was steel. She admitted that her resentment stemmed from envy. I cried halfway through it. But not because I forgave her. I cried because, for once, she was saying the quiet part out loud. At the end of the letter came the hook, the request. "My liver's failing. They say you're still my best match. I know what I've done, but I'm begging you, one last time, save me." I folded the letter and stared at the wall for what felt like hours. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed every time she had mocked me, dismissed me, used me. But it also replayed the moments when we were just kids reading under the covers, watching cartoons, pretending we were astronauts. Was I a monster for not wanting to help? Or was I finally human? The next morning, Isabel found me in the kitchen, holding the letter like it was radioactive. "I have to do it," I said quietly, "or I'll never be free." She didn't try to talk me out of it. She just asked, "On whose terms?" That question was a splinter in my brain. I contacted a lawyer, a good one, a woman named Rachel Green, who specialized in medical ethics and minors' rights. I laid everything out, every extraction, every manipulation, every document Lena had helped preserve. Rachel looked at me with wide eyes and said, "You've got a case, and you've got leverage." So I made a deal. I would undergo the surgery, but only if my father signed a full legal confession detailing every instance of medical coercion they subjected me to. That document would be submitted to the Colorado Department of Child Welfare and used as evidence for policy reform. It wasn't about revenge yet. It was about turning my pain into precedent, making sure no other kid became a disposable cure like me. My father didn't protest. He was losing everything. Maddie was slipping. His legacy was tainted. He just nodded, signed, and looked away. The surgery went well. I was under for 8 hours. I woke up in agony, my side screaming, my throat raw from the intubation. But I was alive. Maddie survived the transplant for 6 more months. She died quietly, in her sleep, with my cells in her body. The day she died, I didn't cry. I went for a walk in the snow, barefoot, until Isabel found me trembling on a park bench. I looked up at her and said, "I'm not sad, I'm empty." I carried that emptiness like a badge for years. It followed me to college, where I majored in biomedical ethics. It followed me into law school, where I spent 3 years dissecting every case that mirrored mine. It followed me into advocacy work, public speaking, writing op-eds. The world called me brave. Survivors clapped for me after my speeches. Doctors whispered that I was the one who changed the law. But inside, I was still waiting for something, closure, redemption. No, I was waiting for justice. It came in a phone call. I was 28 working on a policy proposal in D.C. when Isabel called. Her voice shook. "It's your father. He's sick. Same diagnosis as Maddie." Of course he was. The same genetic predisposition. The same failing marrow. But I wasn't ready for what she said next. "He wants your stem cells." The room spun. I dropped the phone. My vision tunneled. It was happening again. But this time, I wasn't a child. I wasn't trapped. This time, I had a choice. And I was going to make damn sure he regretted ever treating me like a tool. I called Rachel again. I requested a private investigator. I dug into every financial record, every hospital invoice, every signed consent form from my childhood. What I found shattered me. My father had known since I was 7 that I had a 38% chance of developing the same disorder. He had known and hidden it, had forged documents to get around medical boards, had forced procedures on me while pretending to act in my best interest. He didn't just use me. He gambled with my life. That was the moment everything shifted. I wasn't going to donate anything. I was going to take back everything he thought he owned: my silence, my body, my legacy. And I was going to destroy him with the one thing he never anticipated. The truth, I didn't scream. I didn't rage. I didn't cry. The moment I confirmed that my father had forged medical consent forms, I felt a strange, surgical calm settle over me, like a scalpel pressing into skin, sharp, focused, irrevocable. It wasn't just what he'd done to me, it was that he had known. All those years I had begged for mercy, begged to be seen, and he had watched me like a mechanic watches a part failing, calculating whether I could still function long enough to be useful. He gambled my health on Maddie's survival. And then, when she died, he came back for more. This wasn't just personal, it was systemic. And I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was about to become the reckoning. The first step was silence. I didn't return his calls. I didn't respond to the official letters from his new legal team requesting exploratory compatibility tests. I let them stew in the quiet, let desperation ferment. I needed them to believe they had hope. Hope makes people sloppy.
Meanwhile, I built my arsenal.
I reached out to Rachel again and showed her everything I'd found. She connected me with a coalition of journalists working on a national exposé about medical child abuse and the loopholes still exploited by high-income families. They were looking for a face, a survivor, a story that would shake the system. I gave them everything: the forged documents, the scans of bruises and surgical scars, Lena's sworn affidavit, hospital emails leaked anonymously by a sympathetic administrator, the photos from when I was 12, eyes glazed, face pale, hooked up to machines with a sign beside me that read, "Hero Sister." But it wasn't enough. I didn't just want people to feel sorry for me. I wanted them to understand how calculated it all was, how people like my father weaponize love, how science, without ethics, becomes cruelty dressed as hope. So I reached out to someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Elijah. We had met as kids, both chronically hospital-bound, both labeled resilient when we were simply trapped, after I was removed from my parents. We lost contact, but I'd heard through mutual contacts that Eli was now an artist famous for his immersive gallery exhibits on childhood trauma. When I emailed him, I didn't expect a reply. He answered in 2 hours. We met in New York. I explained what I wanted: a multi-room visual exhibit based on my childhood, juxtaposed with medical records, childhood art, and a timeline of every coerced procedure, a living archive of what it means to be a cure. He listened without blinking. At the end, he said, "I've been waiting to paint your story for a decade." Together, we created The Donor Child, a visceral multisensory experience that took visitors through dimly lit corridors, echoing hospital alarms, into rooms lined with IV poles and journal entries, ending in a mirrored chamber where visitors had to look at themselves and read the words, "If you were born to save someone, would you be allowed to say no?" It debuted in D.C. 2 months later, 2 blocks from where my father's new medical venture had just opened its latest clinic. The timing was no accident. The exhibit exploded. Media picked it up. Survivors wrote in. Whistleblowers came forward. The story caught fire. My father's clinic was suddenly under investigation for ethics violations. His funding began to dry up, but he still hadn't made the connection, hadn't realized the girl he discarded had returned not with lawsuits, but with spotlights and a very public mirror. Until the podcast aired. The producers had reached out after the exhibit. They wanted a long-form interview, my voice, unedited, detailing every inch of my upbringing. I didn't hold back. I named names. I read from Maddie's final letter. I played recordings of court hearings from when I was removed from their custody. But the final moment, the one that gutted the internet, was when I read from my childhood diary. "I am not a real girl. I am a bottle of blood with feelings I'm not allowed to have." That line went viral. And that was when I received a handwritten letter. From my father. It arrived in a crisp manila envelope. No return address. Just my name and a familiar slanted cursive. I didn't open it for 2 days. When I did, the smell of his cologne hit me like a wave of nausea. "Olivia," it began, I've seen the stories. I understand that you're angry, and I don't deny that mistakes were made. But I want you to know I always loved you. In my own way. I only did what I had to do to save my family. Now I'm asking, not demanding, will you help me survive? There was no apology, no ownership, just veiled regret and a plea for mercy cloaked in the language of guilt. The same old script. But this time, I had the pen. I didn't reply directly. Instead, I called a press conference. In front of a small crowd of reporters, survivors, and advocates. I read the letter out loud. Then I pulled out my father's signed confession from years earlier, the one he gave in exchange for my final donation to Maddie. I held it up and said, "This is the document he signed, acknowledging what he did to me. And this is what he sent me after trying to rebuild his public image." Then I looked straight into the cameras. I am not a donor anymore. I am not a storybook sacrifice. I am not his cure. The next day, the board of his clinic suspended him pending investigation. 2 days later, the lead donor pulled out. The week after that, the Department of Health formally opened a case into his practices. And yet, I didn't feel the triumph I had imagined. Because revenge is never clean. It's jagged, complicated. Sometimes, it tastes like justice. Other times, it just tastes like ash. That night, Elijah called me. "You did it," he said. I stared out at the city lights and whispered, "Did I?" Because beneath the headlines and the applause, something still pulsed inside me, a question I didn't have the answer to yet. If you were made for a purpose, and then you destroy that purpose, what are you now? In the days after the press conference, the world turned its spotlight on me. My inbox flooded with interview requests, invitations to speak at universities, messages from strangers who called me a hero. Hashtags trended. The exhibit extended its run. Think pieces dissected my voice, my words, my scars.
I should have felt powerful.
But the truth is, when the house of pain you were raised in finally burns down, the silence afterward is deafening. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Every night, I sat by the window of my apartment in D.C., watching the traffic blur into colored streaks like veins of light beneath a city that never stops moving. My phone buzzed constantly. I ignored most of it, until I saw a name I hadn't seen in over a decade. Lena, the woman who once brought me applesauce after surgery, who once whispered, "You are not just what they take from you." She wanted to meet. We sat across from each other in a quiet cafe near the museum where the exhibits still drew long lines. She looked older, of course, gray at her temples, lines around her eyes, but her presence was the same, grounded, real. She reached across the table and took my hand without asking. "I watched your press conference," she said, "and I need you to know, I never thought I'd see this day." I waited for her to say more. She didn't. Instead, she handed me a folder. Inside were pages of handwritten letters, some signed by parents, some by doctors, some by children now grown, survivors, witnesses, people who had walked similar paths but never spoken. Now, they had a voice because I used mine. It should have felt validating, and in a way, it did, but it also made something inside me ache. Because I wasn't sure I had anything left to give. When you spend your entire life being harvested, even giving truth starts to feel like another extraction. Lena saw it in my face. "You don't have to keep bleeding for everyone, Olivia." I nodded, but deep down, I didn't know who I was when I wasn't bleeding. That night, I returned to my apartment and found an envelope slipped under my door. No stamp, no name. Inside was a single photograph, grainy, clearly zoomed in. It showed me sitting with Lena just hours before. On the back was a typed message. Some families don't appreciate betrayal. My chest went cold. It wasn't just a threat. It was a warning. Someone was watching me. Someone who thought I owed them something more. I called Rachel, my lawyer, immediately. We met the next day and reviewed every possibility. A dismissed hospital staff member, one of my father's loyalists. A sympathizer who believed children should be grateful for their role in saving others. We didn't know, but the message was clear: the war wasn't over. Rachel arranged for private security to escort me to events. I canceled all in-person appearances. I moved into a high-security apartment building temporarily. But even behind locked doors, my thoughts weren't safe. What if I had made things worse? What if my story, instead of liberating, had invited another form of control? I felt like a contradiction. On stage, I was celebrated. Behind closed doors, I was terrified. For all the noise I'd made, the silence still knew how to find me. Then came the subpoena. My father, through a new legal team, was suing me for defamation. The man who forged my medical consent forms. The man who gambled with my life and called it parenting. Now he wanted to reclaim his reputation through the courts. Rachel slammed the papers down on her desk and cursed under her breath. "He's not doing this to win," she said. "He's doing it to drag you back into the narrative." I stared at the stack of papers and felt something shift in me. Not fear, not anger, something else. Clarity. He wasn't just trying to punish me. He was trying to reclaim authorship of the story, rewrite the ending, make himself the victim, cast me, again, as the ungrateful child who ruined the family. But he didn't understand. I wasn't the same girl he raised. This wasn't a tragedy. It was a reckoning. I countersued for damages, for medical abuse, for intentional infliction of emotional distress. The court date was set for 4 months later. The media went wild. Op-eds screamed both sides. Some painted me as a trailblazer. Others whispered about attention-seeking, about trauma porn, about family matters that should have stayed private. I didn't respond to any of it. Instead, I dug deeper into what I'd buried: letters from Maddie I hadn't opened, journals I hadn't touched since I was 16, photos I had refused to look at. One night, I found a picture taken when I was 8. I was holding Maddie's hand in the hospital, both of us in gowns, both of us smiling weakly. I looked closer. She had drawn a smiley face on my IV bag. I stared at that picture for hours, until I realized why it mattered. Because even though my family had failed me, there had been moments of humanity inside the machinery. Even though Maddie had hurt me, she had also needed me, not just physically, but emotionally. We were both victims of the same machine, but only one of us lived long enough to dismantle it. That gave me strength, not to forgive, but to face what came next without flinching. On the first day of trial, my father entered the courtroom in a wheelchair. The press whispered. Cameras clicked. He looked older, frail, almost pitiful. He played the part, well, downcast eyes, hands shaking. But when our eyes met, I saw it. The same glint of control, the same calculation. He still believed he could win. But this time, I had the microphone. And I was about to tell the story he spent his life trying to bury. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not physically, but, in its atmosphere, sterile, clinical, like the operating rooms where I'd once laid helpless under fluorescent lights. I sat behind the plaintiff's table, flanked by Rachel and a small legal team, while across the aisle, my father sat in a wheelchair, eyes dull with performance, wrapped in the illusion of frailty. He wore the same tie he used to wear to parent-teacher meetings. I wondered if it was intentional, a callback to the days when people still believed he was a father, and not just a man who built a daughter the way one builds a device assembled for function, discarded when obsolete. The judge, a stoic woman with silver-streaked hair and razor-sharp diction called the room to order. And so it began. His lawyers led with sympathy. A man in his final years, ravaged by disease, clinging to reputation. Yes, he made mistakes. They admitted. But he acted out of love, out of desperation. Who among us wouldn't do anything to save our child? It was a performance as polished as it was predictable, and I let it wash over me without blinking. Because I wasn't here to argue about desperation. I was here to argue about consent. When it was Rachel's turn, she stood slowly and spoke with the precision of a scalpel. We are not here to litigate grief. We are not here to measure a parent's love in pounds of blood or years of sacrifice. We are here because a child my client was used. Her body, her autonomy, her future were treated as a means to an end. And when she broke that cycle, when she said no, she became the villain in her father's eyes. Then came my testimony. I took the stand with hands steady, voice low but unwavering. I told them everything, not just the facts, but the spaces in between the silence of being told, your pain doesn't matter. The erosion of self when your purpose is always someone else's survival. I spoke of Maddie. I didn't vilify her. I told the truth. She was broken in a different way. We were two branches twisted by the same wind. The courtroom was silent. Even my father looked at me with something between confusion and fear, like he was seeing me clearly for the first time and realizing I wasn't his anymore. When I finished, the judge called for a recess. I stepped outside, lungs heavy, the echo of my own words still ringing in my ears. And that's when I saw him. My father, alone in the hallway, out of his chair, leaning heavily against the wall, vulnerable, or pretending to be. It didn't matter. He looked up at me and whispered, "You could have talked to me before all this." I met his eyes and said nothing, because there had never been room for talking, only taking. "I did love you," he said, "in my own way." "In your way," I echoed, "but never in mine." I walked away without looking back. The verdict came 3 days later. The court ruled in my favor. The confession was upheld. My countersuit for damages was approved. His clinic lost its license. His medical license was revoked. He left the courtroom surrounded by cameras not as a brilliant man betrayed by his daughter, but as a cautionary tale of how easily genius becomes cruelty when it forgets humanity. But I didn't feel victorious. Not because I doubted what I'd done, but because winning isn't always a relief. Sometimes it's just the end of bleeding. The media storm faded after a few weeks. I declined most interviews. The exhibit was scheduled for International Tour London, Berlin, Tokyo. Elijah called to celebrate, and I tried to mirror his joy. But something inside me was still quiet. One evening, I returned to Colorado. Isabel met me at the airport with a warm smile and tired eyes. Her hug felt like exhale. Home, not the place, but the presence. We sat on her porch under a muted sky, sipping chamomile tea. She didn't ask questions. She never did, but I offered one answer anyway. "It's over," I said. "No, sweetheart," she replied gently. "It's changed. That's not the same thing." She was right. Later that night, I went through the last box I had carried from D.C. Inside was Maddie's final letter, still folded, still marked with tear stains from years ago. I read it again. The apologies, the raw fear, the longing to be remembered not just as the girl who was saved, but as someone who mattered. And then, tucked between the pages, something I hadn't noticed before. A photo, the two of us as kids, sitting in the hospital garden, our hands covered in finger paint. On the back, in Maddie's handwriting, "You're more than what they took. I just didn't know how to say it." I cried then, not for the pain, not for the past, but for the girl I had been, who thought she needed permission to be whole. She didn't. Weeks passed. I returned to advocacy work, this time not as a survivor, but as a policy advisor helping draft federal guidelines on pediatric medical ethics. I published a book. I taught guest lectures. I learned to speak without flinching. And then came the invitation I never expected. A hospital in Oregon, hosting a pediatric ethics symposium, asked me to keynote their opening session. The theme, the future of consent. I stood on stage that morning, looking out at a sea of white coats and open notebooks, and for the first time, I didn't feel like a relic. I felt like a fire starter. My name is Olivia Monroe, I began, and for the first 16 years of my life, I was a treatment protocol with a pulse. Today, I stand before you as a woman who reclaimed her story not with revenge, but with truth. I told them what I had learned about pain, about survival, about how children don't owe their lives to their origin, and about how we must never confuse silence with resilience. I ended with a single sentence: let no one ever again be born to save, instead of born to be. The room stood in silence, then applause, but I barely heard it, because in that moment, something inside me unlocked. Not closure, not peace, freedom.